then, it being 1 o'clock, March 16th, 1 p.m. First, we will look at any changes to the agenda that any committee members have or staff. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to approval of the February 16th F&P minutes. Any discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll need a motion and a second.
So Keel would move approval.
Thank you.
Wunder-Walsh will second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor or opposed will go through and staff will do the vote counts.
Thank you, Chair. Jack Forsland, Anoka County.
I'll abstain since I wasn't at the previous meeting.
Okay. Angie Stenson, Carver County.
Aye.
Jenna Fabish, Dakota County.
Here, I would abstain as well. I was not at the previous meeting.
Thank you. Jason Piper, Hennepin County.
Aye.
Scott Merrick, Ramsey County. Adam Jessen, Scott County.
Aye.
Madeline Dahlheimer, Washington County. Elaine Kotsukos, Tab Coordinator.
Aye.
Cole Hunker, Met Council.
Aye.
Scott Janowiak, Metro Transit.
Aye.
Aaron Tagg for MnDOT Metro District.
Aye.
Colleen Brown, MnDOT State Aid.
Aye.
Innocent AO from MPCA.
Aye.
Mackenzie Turner Bargan for MnDOT Bicycle and Pedestrian. Nancy Spooner Walsh, DNR.
Aye.
Vicky Lower, Suburban Transit.
Aye.
Carl Keel, Bloomington.
Aye.
Paul Omi, Lakeville. Robert Ellis, Eden Prairie.
Aye.
Brennan Brodhog, Fridley.
Aye.
Ken Ashfeld, Maple Grove.
Aye.
Michael Thompson, Plymouth.
Aye.
Katie White, Minneapolis.
Aye, Nathan Koster, Minneapolis today.
Thank you. Ann Weber, St. Paul.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Next, we'll move on to public comment on committee business. I will ask Bethany, do we have any public members looking to speak or provide comments to the group?
We received no comment requests. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move on to the TAB report. Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. My notes are much in a bullet point format as of yet, so there was quite a bit of discussion at yesterday's TAB meeting. For the chair's report, Second Vice Chair Maris Castillo announced that the TAB meeting in April will have several information items and will most likely last till at least 3 p.m. to note for members to put that on their calendars. MnDOT, Michael Barnes reported on Towards Zero Deaths. There are 36 fatalities to date. Construction season is kicking off soon, and MnDOT staff are filling potholes as weather allows. And PCA did not have a report. For the MAC report, Carl Cummins reported that, again, MSP received the Best Airport Award, the second year in a row. They've joined the Greater MSP in their MBOLD initiative, which includes recycling of food packaging, pallet wraps, etc., and will now try to use products made from recycled materials, promoting a circular economy. There was a crash at Flying Cloud Airport on Tuesday, and the FAA is investigating. There were 3 passengers who did survive. And spring break is their busiest time for flights, and currently through the first week of April, they're scheduling 410,000 seats. And as a result, the parking demand is also high for anyone that's going to be flying out in the next few weeks. For the Met Council report, Deb Barber reported that council members were seated last week, and there are 7 new members. And on the Transportation Committee, there are 5 of the 9 members that are new. Barber addressed work on safety and security on the transit system. And there was a request for a legislative update during the legislature whilst it's in session. And Deb Barber will connect with council staff Jed to see if he can make it to the April meeting. For the Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that the suburban providers are having consistent slow growth. Maple Grove is exploring increasing its number of EV chargers installed at stations and park and rides. Plymouth is exploring further opportunities to interconnect with Maple Grove, as they've had some success already. Southwest Transit approved their microtransit partnership with Lyft and are moving forward on the technical integration. And MBTA's eJust minibus demonstration is going well and has had no issues during one of the storms, at least in February. And there was a request by TAB members for a presentation on microtransit in the future with Metro Transit and the suburban providers, talking about what they have done so far. For the TAC report, Michael Thompson stood in for TAC Chair Jenny Hager and reported that TAC had approved all the streamlined tip amendments and UPWP amendment. And also TAC had discussion on the regional solicitation information item, and we're looking for direction from TAB to bring to the Funding and Programming Committee today. So TAB approved tip amendments that one were for 4 project changes and another for Chisago County, US 8, which extends into Washington County. And they approved the UPWP amendment that went through TAC planning and onto the TAC that added several consulting studies. And there was a recommendation during discussion to involve the business community in engagement for the EV study and EV charging stations. And then there was a question on whether the EV study is coordinating with XL, and staff will follow up on that. For the regional solicitation, there was quite a bit of discussion on that, and that will be brought up in this information item today. Overall, there was questions on why there was no recommendation to change the emissions score for the 2024 solicitation. And the response is there's currently a study underway on emissions, so didn't want to preclude any information coming out of that study. On safety, there was discussion on the approach to use to increase the points. There was a note that adding points dilutes all the other measures, which was acknowledged. The points change does need to have an impact, and they directed staff to review a variety of options, including adding even more weight. On the discussion for breaking a tie when it comes to funding selected projects, they did say that clear direction needs to be given early on prior to it being made at decision-making time. So there should be a rule written in to the application going out. For unique projects, there was a comment that the scoring needs to change from the 1 to 5 point range. There was question on whether the ABRT lines would still need the 25 million change, and there was a response that there are additional lines coming forward. There was discussion on the BRT rule, and there was no specific recommendation on that. They did discuss having an option of looking at percentage versus a $7 million rule. And I didn't, in my notes, have anything more specific than that. So I'll look more later, but maybe Michael will have some memory of what more was said on that. There was talk about the maximums, and did ask that maybe looking at calculating what inflation is from when the maximums were set in 2014 to today, and acknowledging that a few of the maximums had gotten up since 2014. They also suggested revisiting the 80% match, which is a federal requirement. Maybe the region could be lower. It was noted that while many of the projects have 80% to 20% local match, there are a lot of larger projects that are even less than 50%, and thought maybe equaling the, I don't know, playing field at some point or making it more equitable. And then there was a question of whether there's a way to fund the trail portions of road projects separately. And I don't know if that they meant, would they be able to double applying with their trail with the road project and then also as a separate trail project. It wasn't clarified any more than a question. There was also a presentation by Adam Harrington on COVID, and that I think is getting moved to next month for the funding and programming. There was a tab recommendation to have Adam send me the dates and locations of the community forums that are scheduled in April. And there was questions also on the route changes that were made, whether Metro Transit had looked at the frequency of some of the routes that were left. As a result, there were a large span of service. So there was limited frequency, so pretty much made it ineffective for having a route in place. There was a recommendation that Metro Transit look at, or the council as a whole, include a regional bike share system with transit, integrating it in together to help with the first mile. And then a note was made that Transit Driver Appreciation Day is March 22nd. And that's what I have.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. Good detail on the interesting meeting yesterday. A lot of discussion, and I know we'll talk more about that on our second informational item today. Any questions for Elaine? Okay, thank you, Elaine. Seeing none, we'll move on to business. Seeing there are no business items, we will now move on to informational items. So to kick this off, we'll be going over the Protect and Regional Solicitation Program balancing. And so I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just getting set up, but Brian will be kicking us off here.
Thanks, Bethany, and thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Brian Shekleton. I am in MnDOT's Office of Sustainability and Public Health, and I'm the Principal Climate and Resilience Planner. If you go to the next slide, Bethany. So Protect is one of the many new federal programs that were authorized in 2021's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's designed to make our system resilient to current and projected natural hazards. The formula program sends Minnesota $23 million annually, and there's also a discretionary fund which we managed by US DOT. They've not released a notice of funding opportunities. Nationally, there'll be a $450 million pot of money, so it's going to be hard for Minnesota to be competitive against other regions and other states. Some of the key funding limitations will be, or items will be tracked at the statewide level to ensure that we stay compliant around planning activities and capacity development phase activities. We just need to be able to ensure that a minimum of 2% of our funds are used for planning activities annually, up to 40% for new construction capacity. We can use up to 10% of funds for development phase activities, including planning, feasibility analyses, revenue forecasting, and a variety of other pre-construction activities. Next slide, please. So there are 4 key priorities to these Protect funds. Resilience improvements will be the lion's share of where most of the funds will be spent. We'll be looking at things like improving drainage, retrofitting and upgrading assets to meet and exceed design standards for vulnerabilities, potentially relocating roadways or elevating bridges. As I mentioned, there's a mandated 2% minimum that must be spent on resilience planning. I'll get to that later. Their coastal infrastructure is part of this as well, and the Great Lakes are considered coastline of the United States. We're still learning more about what that means for the North Shore and the infrastructure along that coastline. And our last bullet is about official evacuation routes used to direct people away from known community vulnerabilities in very specific areas. There are two official evacuation routes in Minnesota. They're both linked to nuclear power plants. And both evacuation routes are actually linked to the wind that may occur around those plants. Bethany, if you could go to the next slide, please. So MnDOT's leadership through the Transportation Programming and Investment Committee voted to distribute Protect formula funds using a 70-30 split between districts and area transportation planning areas. The commissioner was very clear that Protect is intended to expand resilience, not just to backfill budget gaps or to supplant other funds. Now we're approaching the how we can fund projects based on a phased approach. The first phase we'll use for fiscal years 24 and 25, and we'll select projects based on eligible activities in the FHWA program guidance. I'll get to that in a couple of slides here. And then we're actually in the process of developing a resilience improvement plan right now, interviewing consultants tomorrow. And once we have a resilience improvement plan set, that will guide our investments based on tactics and projects that are responding to Minnesota's vulnerabilities. It'll guide the Protect plan's development. It'll reduce the non-federal local share for projects by up to 10%, so it's going to save the state money. And if I could just, and Bethany, if you go to the next slide, the real question is, what are we protecting against? And I will admit the council has really led the way in the state in terms of doing climate vulnerability assessments. Our DNR office Office of Climatology has been very clear that Minnesota is getting warmer and wetter, especially over the last 30 years, which is the climatological scale that we look at. And 9 of the 10 warmest winters have happened since 1980. We've had significant rain and snow in Minnesota October, November, December, January, February, and March. Growing up, that's not what I experienced. Variability in weather that we experience is the key to how we need to approach our infrastructure, so that we build things that can manage rain in January or February. Because the side effects of winters with rain, ice storms, wet and heavy snowstorms, this is the big challenge going forward. Bethany, if you go to the next slide. This is just another example of demonstrating that variability is key. The map on the left comes from the U.S. Drought Monitor, and it's pulled on March 7th this year. The map on the right is from this time last year. Orange is extreme drought. It goes down to yellow, which is abnormally dry. Last spring in the Arrowhead, they were not planning for massive flood release. And then all of a sudden the heavens opened up and they had to manage record-setting floods. Likewise in southern Minnesota and western Minnesota, they had a great spring last year. They got the crops in, and then in June, we experienced a flash drought. And now western Minnesota and much of southern Minnesota is experiencing drought situations. I'm going to just drop one thing in the chat because the Twin Cities National Weather Service tweeted out what's it called? It's a snow water equivalency map, which identifies how the water within the snow this year is just unprecedented. 2019 was the last time we had as much water in our snowpack. And again, variability and how we design our infrastructure is the key to the game for climate adaptation. Bethany, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the bipartisan infrastructure law specifies 17 responses to natural hazards and vulnerabilities that can be funded through the Protect program. These are all, this list has a really national perspective, and because this law has so many new programs the Federal Highway Administration has not been able to develop guidance yet on how to spend this fund. And so we're using this as the guidance for our, we've been referring to as phase one of the PROTECT program. These are all common intuitive tactics that increase infrastructure resilience. Transportation departments around the state have been implementing these tactics. Go to the next slide, please. So our transportation, our leadership voted to distribute funds with the 70-30 split through fiscal year 27. Note that the dollar amounts on this scale won't be a lot of money that could be used for building landmark projects. This pot of money is really meant to infuse resiliency into existing projects. And so transportation districts around the state, as well as the ATPs, are really exploring just that point. Like, what do we have? What could we infuse some capital money into to build resilience? If you go to the next slide, please. Once we have a resilience improvement plan, we'll use that for guiding PROTECT. It'll be designed to support long range and immediate plans for transportation system resilience. The plan will use a risk-based assessment of vulnerabilities and assets. It'll identify climate vulnerabilities. It'll assess the resilience of transportation and community assets. It'll describe how should we respond to weather events and natural disasters and be prepared for the variability of changing conditions. It'll help describe codes, standards, and regulatory measures that could be augmented to ensure resilience improvements actually succeed over the life of the assets. And it'll consider benefits of combining transportation assets and natural infrastructure. And of course, as I think I mentioned, this plan will also reduce the non-federal local match by up to 10%, helping districts and ATPs and other units of government tailor their climate resilience priorities to project elements that actually respond to Minnesota's vulnerabilities. If you go to the next slide, please, Bethany. So we're asking planners to consider these questions when thinking about project selections. Like, what is the actual vulnerability of the area that the project is in? Is the resilience improvement something that will have to be addressed again quickly? Are there different tactics that might achieve resilience, and will the project benefit disadvantaged communities? This is, if you go to the next slide, please. That is, in a nutshell, what PROTECT is. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. I'm also happy to answer any questions right now.
Okay, thank you, Brian, for that overview. Any questions for Brian on PROTECT?
Mr. Chair, this is Carl. I have a question.
Yeah, Carl.
So, Brian, are the $23 million, is this new money to the state, or is this diverted from a different program? That's kind of first part of the question. And the second is it coming directly to MnDOT? And if so, you had mentioned, the ATPs or local partners. What is the avenue that they participate?
Right. It is new money. This is a brand new program for everybody, for the federal government as well as for us in the states. Money is being sent to MnDOT. We will distribute it to the regional districts as well as the ATPs. The regional solicitation process that you're familiar with is how you would access these funds. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so maybe it's more of a question for the rest of the group. So do we anticipate that we would have a different category in our solicitation, or would we use it to fund one of our existing categories?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Great question. I think that may be part of the discussion is looking at points within certain categories. I don't know that we do a whole new category, but I guess I'm not that far ahead. But I see Steve popped up here, so Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And that gets a little, and we'll wait for other questions for Brian here too, who did a great job, but that gets a little bit into the second part of this presentation on kind of how we build this into our processes, and that's what Bethany will go through. But so we'll get to that, but did want to see if other people have. Brian's the expert here, so if there's other questions for him, we'll go through those first. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So it sounds like we'll be getting to Carl's question in more detail in the next few slides.
Yes.
But any other questions for Brian on this first portion?
Chair, this is Nathan. I have a question for Brian. In the case of the carbon reduction program, there was a lot of debate about like, hey, we need to do the planning activities first before we can do the capital, and there's so many eligible areas. And because I'm seeing similar themes and like money's coming out so quick, Brian, I'm wondering if you can highlight that, if there's any stipulations on like getting ahead of the planning and like figuring out like what we're gonna do, or is it kind of like, hey, here's all the stuff, we're gonna study it, but also like just start trying to do stuff as quick as you can too?
It's a great question. It's always fun to stand up a program and execute it simultaneously. The key piece is this: we have the STIP and the TIP, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Plan and the Transportation Improvement Plans. To access Protect funds, a project must be in one of those two plans. And so at least for this fiscal year and the subsequent fiscal year, we will rely on projects that are in those plans. And so this is where two things happen. One, there's not enough money here to do landmark projects. So this really is about finding ways to add resilience into existing plans, whether that's folding things into a project or doing a planning exercise that can be used for a multiplicity of projects. And so the key piece to access the funds is to get something into one of those two plan sets, the STIP or the TIP. Once something is in there, the funds can be accessed. Does that kind of get to your question? I mean, with the carbon reduction piece and with the NEVI program, those kind of are the three programs that we've been standing up here at MnDOT in the last 6 to 12 months. And we're all kind of kicking these things off in different ways.
Yeah, one quick follow-up. Does MnDOT know where they're going to allocate the Protect funding to existing TIP and STIP projects, since that timeline's pretty short, or is that still TBD?
It's a great question. And Steve and Bethany can really kind of give an insight into how we've been doing this, because I've been going back and forth with the two of them now for the last couple of weeks and doing something very similar with districts and ATPs around the state. We have the STIP and the TIP have existing programs within them, but how we fold this money into the projects within those two plan sets is the crux of the question. And so we don't have a master plan or a master document. I'm engaging with planners around the state and engineers around the state, trying to help them kind of understand what this program is and figure out how to work through the minimal guidance that we actually have to use the money.
But the key thing is it's not meant to fill shortfalls, it's to make projects more resilient.
Correct?
Okay.
And that's actually explicit in the law, and that was reiterated by the Commissioner of Transportation too.
Thank you. It's new. Sorry, I know a lot.
No, that's not. This is new. There are no easy questions.
Mr. Chair, Mandy Dahlheimer, Washington County. I've got a question.
Yes, go.
So I'm just looking, this is maybe more of a clarification. So I'm looking at the slide about eligible improvement activities. So just to clarify,
yep,
this funding, I mean, it really looks like it's intended to fund specific elements rather than like an overall project. So like if I am given this money for some project in Washington County, I will essentially apply based on, however many bullets I can kind of cover of these, where I'm putting in riprap or where I'm putting in other protective features. Is there a scenario where an entire project would be considered a resilience improvement activity?
The fun thing for me is so much of these investments is context sensitive. And I say fun kind of in air quotes because it is about the context. So I'm going to use the example of the Lake Walk in Duluth. It got destroyed by ice, and I had this back and forth with some of our finance staff, and FHWA was present for this conversation where we were talking about the Lake Walk in the abstract. So, okay, it gets destroyed by lake ice. The Duluth wants to rebuild it. How would protect funds be used in that project? And what we kind of agreed on was the vulnerability is still there. The lake is going to create ice. There will be wind. It will move up on shore. And if you rebuild the lake walk in the same spot, you can't pay for it all with protect funds. If you were to move it, you could move it out of the area where it might be destroyed again. Then you could potentially use all protect funds for that. But if there were elements like the boulders that were placed in front of the lake walk, maybe those boulders could be paid for with protect funds. To your riprap example, I mean, if there are elements in a project that will protect the asset and also create resilience to projected climate changes, then that is in line with what would potentially be funded. So it's less, and from the way we've been approaching it, is it's less about the boxes checked, but more about what will happen in 5 to 10 years if we continue to get rain in every month of winter. If in the summertime we go from a flash drought to super extreme rain events where the soils can barely infiltrate and there's such a volume of water they couldn't anyways. You know, there's a southeastern Minnesota, that district is looking at combining some of the protect funds to create a culvert lining project, combining the funds primarily to minimize paperwork, but they know where their culverts are of lower quality, and in lieu of going off and doing entire projects of rebuilding them, they're just going to line them so that the liner, which is much cheaper, creates that resilience over the 10-year time frame so that they know that they can subsequently program in larger fixes when necessary. I wish there was a simple answer to your question. I appreciate it too.
Thank you for that response, Brian. It almost sounds like it's what I say, low cost, high benefit projects. I mean, kind of like for roads, to improve safety, you're doing lighting, rumble strips, a little bit of shoulder widening. So it's almost kind of not apples to apples, but somewhat of trying to hit those elements that have high benefit.
Right. That's exactly right.
Okay. Let's take one more question and then we'll move on here. Okay, Brian, thank you. And we'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, Bethany, do you want to?
Yeah, thank
first
you,
couple?
Chair. So we have the council's approach to protect funds is really to utilize the eligible elements in the projects that were selected in the last regional solicitation cycle. The benefits of this is we get to pay down some of the over programming, which we increased this cycle, and allows us to do some faster advanced construct payback. And then moving forward, there will be some new language in the 2024 solicitation for projects in 28 and 29. And then in the big evaluation study that will kick off later this year, there will be additional opportunities to evaluate how we can better incorporate this new program and identify either projects or elements that best fit within this program. And so through the previous projects that we selected, there were some very obviously eligible elements in that in the cost estimates. So what we focused on was the storm sewer, ponding, erosion and landscaping, and retaining walls. And we were able to fill up our allocation of those protect funds just based on these 4 eligible elements. And Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Bethany. And so this, we got a couple things we want to go through on this slide here, and we'll take our time going through it. But with the money changing so much over the last year plus with IIJA, we wanted to do a better job, I think, of bringing kind of where we're at with the, especially the funding and programming committee. So you can see the first row is this starting balance we have. Again, the last solicitation went through 2027. The first year of the TIP that we're working on right now, again, is 2024. So we've got to zero that out. That's the federal rule. So we can't have over-programming or set-asides in that first year of the TIP. So that's why we're paying that down to 0. And what we're showing here is that we're going back to the existing list, and in each case, using that protect money to fund the stormwater, erosion, and retaining walls that Bethany had on the last slide to get us to a more reasonable over-programming amount. So you can see row 3 there is the new over-programming levels after we pay down over-programming. So that puts us at, I think the sweet spot is probably that $10 to $12 million over-programming per year. So come January 2025, we're going to start trying to get that down to 0. And so that'll be a mix of projects moving forward or asking for program year extensions. But that puts 2026 about that 10.5, and then 27 still pretty high. It's almost $16 million of over programming. And so that's quite a bit. And part of that reason is in MnDOT's updated STIP guidance, they did not extend the on-system bridge program. And remember, that was just about $5 million. And so we used our STP dollars in that case. And so if that money does get continued by the federal government and then in a future bill, then, we'd be closer, I guess, to that 10 or $11 million in 2027. So that's kind of the where we're at with the protect money. We still have carbon reduction money that's available. So that's one thing to note here too. And it's quite a bit actually in 26 and 27, almost $8 million. And our plan for that is to wait till the state's carbon reduction strategy is submitted. That's a November deadline for all states across the country. Some have already got those in. See what that says. And then also we have Tony Fisher from our staff is doing the multimodal greenhouse gas study, which also could inform kind of the best use of these funds, as well as the TDM regional study that's going on. So still some money out there in the, I call the short-term years here, 26 and 27. But that's kind of the general picture for these earlier years. And then, the next solicitation that we're working on right now is 28 and 29. And so the approach for Protect is Brian's going to help, Shekleton's going to help us write up language to get better project elements within those projects to identify what those Protect eligible elements would be. And then the real question is kind of what do you do in the next one, 2026 cycle, to think about, is it a new application category? Is it continuing kind of what we're doing right here in the short term or something else with the Protect money? So there's kind of 3 stages that we've kind of thought through between Bethany and myself and others on how to approach the Protect money. But I think with that, maybe we'll see if people have questions and turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Steve. Maybe first I'll go to Carl because I know he had a question on some of this. Carl, did you have any follow-ups?
Thank you, Mr. No follow-up. So as I understand, the answer to my question was the new funds will be kind of absorbed into our existing program. We're not going to fund any new projects or increase the amount of federal funding available to those projects. Rather, we're just going to reduce the amount of over programming that we have. It solves a problem that we're trying to deal with, and that potentially in future solicitations we'll have a conversation about, do we do the same thing in future years, or do we have a separate category?
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Any
Chair,
other-
this is Jason from Hennepin.
Yeah, Jason Piper, go for it.
Thanks, Chair. Just more of a bookkeeping question. So for the sake of discussion, let's say Hennepin County has a roadway reconstruction project that's now been flagged as a good candidate for protect money now to help with that overprogramming issue. If those protect funds are moved over to this project, does that require some changes to how county staff manage like our cost distribution spreadsheet? You know, if we have some money coming from STP and we have some monies coming from this protect, does that kind of put some undue hardship on our project team as we try to track funding coming from maybe multiple programs?
Yeah, great question, Steve.
It is a great question, and is Colleen Brown on the call here today or no?
I am Steve.
Yeah, maybe you can chime in here too.
We will have to track the protect and the carbon reduction funds separately in your projects. We will have to, because those are reporting numbers and they're actually programmed in the STIP. So right now there's some 24 projects that have a partial STP and partial protect or partial CRP. And those are programmed with a smart code that says protect in the description. And we have to track that separate in your project SEQ. So yes, it will be a little bit more work, but it's not that much work really.
So
Not a
yeah,
separate SP, not a separate SP number or anything, Jason, just identifying the funds as a different pot.
Okay, thank you.
thank you, Colleen. Other questions for Steve on this slide?
I think
This
I'm
is-
mute. And
This is Mike Samuelson with MnDOT.
Yes.
Thanks.
I don't know if this is a question for Steve or maybe Brian or maybe both of you together, but you know, my understanding of the presentation from Brian is that the protect funds are meant to expand resiliency and not backfill funding gaps. It kind of feels like maybe they're being used to help, you know, get our balance down to zero here. And I guess I want to better understand, are we proposing additional scopes to projects that are already, you know, in the program, or how are we addressing the sort of the guidance from protect while, you know, also addressing the funding gap that exists, or the difference in the balance that exists?
Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Brian can chime in too. I think you've got a couple issues here. One is the timing. You know, even Brian talked about the resiliency plan that they're working on. We're in program year 2024, and so kind of the best case scenario would be to use it on new elements of new projects or to expand the scopes of those. But particularly in those first 2 years, you know, we're not going to be starting a new federal project. We did. Bethany and I did look back at the unfunded project lists, and there are next projects on the lists that could have or do have eligible project elements that could absorb protect money. So that would be kind of the purest form of a new project being funded with the protect money. But you know, given that the regional solicitation just ended, those projects aren't in the TIP yet. And given the level of overprogramming that we put on the table last November, December timeframe, kind of the combination of things kind of led us to that maybe paying down the overprogramming was the best approach in this case, and that kind of more future oriented, maybe we take a different tact on it.
And I just want to reiterate that we've done a robust back and forth, and we're still we're still going back and forth about what exactly we can do. And so we're not, like, we've been intentional about not supplanting funds and trying to find projects that and ways to spend these funds that will augment the resilience of projects. So your concerns are on the spot, and we're working through them too.
All right, appreciate that additional detail, and yeah, recognize it's definitely a challenge to roll out. I'm sure all these new dollars with minimal guidance and very short timeline. So thank you.
And then Steve, I just want to point out too, if there might be some confusion, we're not using the protect funds to pay down the over programming. We're replacing STP funds with protect funds. And then those STP funds are being released. So then those are actually paying the over programming. So it's not just taking the protect and paying down the over programming. It's kind of like a swap. The end result is paying down ending over programming, but we're not using them to directly pay down over programming. They're going into projects.
Here, I have a follow-up then for Steve and Colleen on that is, does this table require any action for F&P, TAC, or TAB, or anybody, given how that was described? Or is this just more of reporting out what has already been decided?
I assume it's just more informational at this point, but I guess for staff, will this ever need to come for an official vote or action through our committee, TAB, etc.?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and members, it's a great question. Something we discussed internally. At one point we weren't sure if we were going to have enough eligible elements on the existing 94 projects that we selected, believe it or not. And so that we were looking at new projects. Our thought process was if we were considering brand new projects from the unfunded list, that certainly would be an action item. Typically, when money comes back to us and we have a large amount of over programming, it's almost like before the TAB policy on how to reallocate funds, and typically that is not an action item. If somebody releases funds or we get some new amount of funds and it's pays down over programming, we should work with Colleen and Cindy Krumzig, and it's more of an information item to the committees.
Okay. Thank you. And maybe a question for Brian. Brian, MnDOT, you said kept 70% and 30% went to the, the regions. I assume MnDOT could have kept 100%, right? Or was there some requirement that they share this money with the MPOs?
No, there were no requirements about how this money should be spent, and so there was a pretty robust back and forth within leadership about how the money should be distributed, and the decision was 70% would go to the districts and 30% would go to the ATPs. So MnDOT Central has no money in this pot, and the districts and the ATPs are managing the funds, and we're providing guidance on how to best do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Angie.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for the presentations, the specific information. I know many agencies have been excited about this funding for a while, hearing about it as an addition from IIJA and how we can really make a difference in resilience and climate change in the system. This does seem like a lost opportunity to use these funds for new aspects, and specifically does not meet the item in slide 4 to expand resilience. As others have pointed out, it's says right on the slide, it's not meant to backfill funding gaps or supplant other federal funds. And that's exactly what the proposal is. So Carver County is opposed to this recommendation and would like to see other options, including direction from TAB. The federal funding reallocation policy says that process does not address how to distribute new federal dollars available through larger specific programs. And that tab will make a separate decision specific to those programs and timing. So really, as a committee, I would like to see also some different options about how we can use this over $20 million as a region to really to advance its purpose, to use it on new resilience projects. I don't see it as different than the carbon reduction funding that came through. And as far as timing, it's really only 2 months after the projects have been awarded for 26 and 27. So I don't see that as a timing issue for identifying new projects. I also have one question on the 24 and 25 funding. Is that I thought that MnDOT was actually using that funding, and the MPO then was going to be receiving funding specific for 26 and 27. Can you clarify that for me? Thank you.
So our leadership voted on the 70-30 split, acknowledging that the money that went out to the ATPs would not change, that the dollar amount would not change. Part of that conversation was we wanted to maintain consistency for locals, and also because we've been hearing from other states that some states are engaging, some states are not. We don't have a sense for whether or not our $23 million allocation may change over time. And so we wanted to create consistency and create flexibility. And I'm afraid I'm forgetting one part of your question. Sorry.
Yes, I had seen information that MnDOT was able to use the 24 and 25 funding. I may be confused that was actually 22 and 23 funding. Steve, I
think so. Yeah.
Just wanted some clarification on the fiscal years. But
so it's a great question. So obviously the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed in 2021. 2022 we had funds allocated, and I'll be honest, I'm on month 4 in this job, and my understanding is that some of those the money that we could have used in 22 was programmed into developing into paying for the resilience and improvement plan. It's going to be expensive, and by combining the money that we received over the first year into partial of the second year, we're able to fund that, which will ultimately save us money over the long haul. And so the payback made it make sense to kind of move the money in those ways. Does that help answer your question?
Okay, yes, thank you. I think I was confused about the 22 and 23. So what I'm seeing is the available money for the different fiscal years, which is really similar to what was available for the carbon reduction funds that were just allocated 2 months ago. So, okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Steve, just to clarify, I mean, so for the 24 through 27, the cumulative amount the Metro ATP gets is 6.4 million, correct? It's not 20 million. Am I reading that right?
For the 4 years, or?
Yeah, in the annual, okay, or is it 6.4 million per year over each year?
Yeah, so look at, so Mr. Chair, if maybe just direct you to that second row, protect funding by year. 6.4 is for the entire Metro District, so we carve off part of it for Chisago County, the 8th county in Metro District, and so that's what gets us to that 6.278 million. The reason those first few years are higher, I believe, Brian, is because 22 and 23, MnDOT central office wanted to keep the ATPs whole, so that's why they gave us more money in 24 and 25, and they used the 22 and 23 money, and then the money kind of trails off in 26 and 27. So I think the total is about 21 million and change of 24 through 27, and we're assuming, and MnDOT is assuming that this funding source will continue into the future. So that's why we're talking about the next 2 solicitations too.
Okay, good to know. And maybe I have a question for Angie. Angie, do you have any suggestions or ideas about what those options could be? Would that be going to the solicitation unfunded list, and maybe that's an option, or what are you thinking, I guess, just to
Yes,
provide?
I would like to see all the options that staff has looked at. It sounds like they have looked at some different options. So
Okay.
if that, that could include the existing solicitation list. It could include a future solicitation. Just, I think there are other options to consider.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, so it's a good conversation. So I think at F&P, one thing we should do is kind of look at this table and kind of think about the over programming levels, and if one option is to fund some new projects, or you can say, yeah, we want to use the protect money on existing elements that are eligible, thus kind of paying down our balance on that. And if we did come back, that would be an action item for sure. Like I think Nathan's question previously. Bethany can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's 3 projects. If you go back to our 2022 solicitation, there's 3 projects. The next from our existing application categories that do have protect eligible elements within them. And is that your question, Angie? I'm kind of what we looked at the next unfunded project across all 12 or 13 categories. 3 of those projects do have elements that could accept protect money.
Yes, my point is that this proposal is backfilling already funded projects and not funding new elements or new projects. So I'd like to see an option that fulfills that purpose of the funds.
Hey, Steve, if I can add, a lot of the eligible elements within the next few projects are very small. And so I'm not sure if that is worth the extra paperwork or award for, effectively, some of these projects are $300,000 to $600,000. If that award makes sense to go down the list, because I don't think it's going to change people's funding needs ultimately.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, Steve, this is Colleen again. That was going to be my next question, was if it's a very small amount that's eligible in those next projects that's on the list, how is the remaining funding, where is that going to come from? The county or city has to make up for the balance, right? So.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so how much time do we have to figure out options in our approach? I mean, are we looking at any deadlines, or we need to spend the money by a certain time, or what do we, this is just kind of informational to get on our radar. Can you talk about next steps, Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So again, yeah, information item for the 2024 funds, those are being put into the draft tip right now, because we do need to use those funds as that program year is starting. And so some of that protect money that's shown in 2024 is helping us pay back. Remember the $15 million of program year extensions you just approved back in January, February? Part of that's actually beneficial. It helps pay off those projects early versus cutting into the next solicitation. So 2024 is pretty well set. The remaining 3 years are still open and don't have the same level of urgency as 2024. I guess would be my point on that.
Okay, and has TAB been presented with this, or have they talked about it? And since it is a kind of a permanent new funding source, have they talked about maybe we create a new category within the regional solicitation, or is this not on their radar yet?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not on their radar yet. We did prep them to say that future discussions would take place on protect. At the TAB Executive Committee, we brought that to them and told them that $21 million that we have in the first 4 years here, but we certainly haven't discussed it at length, and we have that on the agenda for, I guess, the April TAB meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. And does this conclude the presentation on Protect?
Yeah, it does. I did have one more kind of point to make on this table while we've got it on the screen, but I just want to make sure others don't have any Protect specific questions.
Chair, I did, because I think you asked a question, and Steve, I'm hoping maybe the group can get clarity on an answer, but 2024, from what I heard from your answer, is set and it's going to tab because this is an immediate problem to address the over-programming. Did I hear that correctly? Like this is the solution to the 2024 over-programming. That's on a very quick timeline.
Mr. Chair, members, yeah, 2024 is already, that would be the approach for 2024, and MnDOT, Metro District and Central Office are preparing that draft tip that's coming back to FNPA usually in the April-May timeframe here. So yes, the answer is yes on that.
All right, and then Chair, I think the second part that maybe you and Angie asked, I think it would help the group understand too, is there a timeline on the funds for 25, 26, and 27 that, you know, FHWA or someone else has that like we have to get that spent soon? Or is there still an option that could move forward into 28 and 29 and be more targeted towards the intent and direction of Protect and coming up with a different solution for over programming?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Nathan. So we haven't heard from MnDOT that they're going to absorb more of the earlier year money. They took the first 2 years, 22 and 23. Like I said, 24 is settled here, and we actually needed the money in that year. That was positive, I think, from our programming perspective. We haven't asked though either, but I imagine they're going to want, you know, at some point they're going to send it to the ATPs, and if the ATPs can't use it, they're going to send it back, and MnDOT's going to use it, you know, because they're giving it the 30% to the ATPs with the intent of using it in those years. Once we get over this short-term hurdle of urgency of spending the money, now it's, can you use it? If not, MnDOT will use it. They've got needs, and they've got eligible projects, and that's my guess, right, Brian?
Honestly, I have been tasked with trying to get as much money spent by the appropriate folks as possible, and I have, if there are conversations about reabsorbing money back into Central MnDOT, I've not been part of those conversations, and you know, creating something out of whole cloth while trying to execute simultaneously has its challenges. This is one of those, and trying to figure out the bigger policy questions of where does money actually live is one of those pieces that I think we still have yet to determine.
Mr. Chair, this is Carl. I'd like to just highlight a comment that Steve made. And again, one of the impacts of paying off our over-programming is that we'll have more monies available for future solicitations. And so I think we definitely have the opportunity, if we want to give more points or have a separate category for resiliency issues, we can do that. So I think I don't think we've given up these funds, if you will, for resilience. We've just pushed them off.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think Colleen touched on that a little bit as well. So it sounds like though overall we're not going to lose access to the intent of this Protect money, and I think there's an ability for us to talk about future regional solicitations and how to incorporate some of those outcomes. So thank you for that, Carl. All right, any final comments, questions for Steve? We got to get to our big next item here, because I think there's going to be some discussion on that as well. So.
Fun is yet to be had. Yeah, Mr. Chair, one last point on this table here, and the TAC heard this presentation here from Adam Harrington and Metro Transit earlier this month. TAB heard it yesterday, and we had planned to have Adam come today, but some scheduling conflicts pushed him to next month. But he was talking about the Metro Transit and transit in specific, the driver shortage and the COVID impacts and of cutting service, and really an interesting presentation with a lot of questions at both of the two previous meetings. So one thing that we wanted to daylight to this group that Adam brought to us is 4 projects, 2 each in fiscal year 2022 and 2023, not even shown on this chart here because it's past due. They have put most of them, 3 out of the 4, into FTA grants, and you may remember that once the money transfers from FHWA to FTA, the rules of the game are completely different. They have a 5-year window to spend the funds. And so what Adam had talked to us about, and we wanted to daylight with this group, was and just some acknowledgement that while those funds are going to be utilized in that year, that Metro Transit's not seeking a program year extension for 22 and 23, which, like I said, 22 is long gone here. They won't be actually using it on the project in that particular year. And to me, that points to going back to that program year policy. And I think we need to maybe take another look at that and how it relates to the transit funds, because they do have so much more flexibility. And so again, these are four projects in 22 and 23, and they'll be putting those into grants, but not used in those program years. And so that was one thing we did want to bring to the group. And again, that's a function of Metro Transit cutting service, and so not wanting to add new service at the same time as cutting service because of driver shortage and COVID impacts.
Okay.
So I did want to ask if people have any questions on that. It gets a little confusing with the FTA rules, but that's our general approach that we'd like to take on those 22 and 23 projects.
Okay, just so I understand, so you're talking about projects that were awarded through regional solicitation?
Yeah, several solicitations go in
Yep.
program years 2022
Yep.
and 2023. 3 of the 4 of those are in FTA grants, but will not be, the service won't be started in those particular program years, like perhaps a roadway project through FHWA. And that's one of the differences between FHWA and FTA. And wish a little bit that Adam was able to join us here today with his presentation to kind of expound upon some of the issues they're facing. But we did talk to the other suburban transit providers, and they think they're able to deliver those other projects in those program years. But so we did kind of ask a few questions around to the other providers on that one. But I guess any questions on that from the group?
Question for Steve?
Mr. Chair, this is Scott, Ramsey County.
Yeah.
Just back on this protect thing for a second, I want to make sure that I can weigh in from Ramsey County's perspective. I would agree that, big picture, we shouldn't be relying on protect to cover our shortfalls with over programming, but I guess I would personally rely on staff in terms of the 2024 program if we don't have any local projects that can deliver the protect money in 24, which I'm assuming is probably the case. That I think it would be much better to keep that money in the local program as opposed to giving it back to MnDOT. So I guess that's my suggestion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. And then Steve, I know you're kind of throwing this other side issue out there, but is Adam saying they can't deliver on these projects? So instead of using the turning that money back per our policy, they want to earmark that for their own projects? Or I'm just trying to understand what you're really asking here.
Yeah, it's more, this is something that transit projects in our region have done for quite some time. And the point of really bringing it up is just to daylight it so people kind of know it. And I think where the impacts is that program year policy and needing to adjust that in the future. So the projects will still be put into federal grants, and so we'll meet those deadlines as required in the program year policy. But the implementation will, instead of being in 22 and 23, they'll all be pushed back to 2025 implementation on those. But they will be, just like an FHWA, you have to be federally authorized to move forward. They'll still put those into an FTA grant, but the construction or the implementation of those will be delayed out to 2025.
And I can add a little bit to that. The difference with the FTA funds is,
Mm-hmm.
as Steve mentioned, they're available for 5 years, where the FHWA are 1 year. So that money isn't moving around out of that program year it was in. It stays there till it's spent, and they're drawing it down. The one thing with FTA that's also different, that we can't use the program year extension on these types of projects, is they don't allow for advanced constructing, using that terminology. So if you move the project to a later year, our program year extension says they do it the next year. FTA wouldn't allow them to do that because the money would be in the future year.
Yeah.
So it ties our hand of allowing, and that's why the flexibility with FTA funds is that 5-year window. And it keeps that money in its current program year. But they still have to do the project and are reimbursed as it's done. The money is drawn down, which is different than the FHWA, where their projects are complete them and they're reimbursed. FTA has them draw down the funding, so it's already sitting in the account, waiting to be implemented and reimbursed on the project. So there's a lot of different things with FTA funding that we can't use the program year policy. But that might be something, like as Steve said, we might have to put into some writing of how that's done.
Okay, thank you, Elaine, for that additional insight. Do any members have any further comment on this issue? But I assume at some point maybe Adam could come back and talk in a little more detail on this and maybe how it would affect our policy and guidance.
Yeah, he'll be here next month.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other hands raised.
Yes, I have, Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question for Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to find out, does the Protect program need the requirement of submitting like the strategies that we need to use the fund, like carbon reduction program? Do we have to submit some strategies to Federal Highway Administration, get approval before these funds can be used?
Great question. And the quick answer is we have not explored going down that path. This is where it's a little more hands-on for me to engage with folks like Steve and Bethany to try to figure out how do we make this work in a way to achieve kind of the resilience pieces that were in the bipartisan infrastructure law. We haven't developed a method for identifying what resilience elements have been met and how to track them. That may come. And again, this is the challenge of starting a program and doing it simultaneously. I talk daily with our local FHWA staff, and that's not something that they have brought up. And to be fair, I have a spreadsheet that I have where I identify resilience elements, whether the project has received a thumbs up from the staff, and what the status of the concept is, because the list I have is a bunch of concepts from different districts and ATPs.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think we need to move on to our next item here, which is the potential changes to 2024 regional solicitation. Joe and Steve.
Okay, thank you. Joe and I will tag team this, and we'll ask for others to help us as it relates to the TAB meeting yesterday. And special thanks to you, Chair Thompson, here for giving up a half day to be the technical rep and the TAC chair for a day. Did a really great job here in front of our in front of the TAB.
That'll be the first and the last time for me. So.
Okay, let it go down in history then, right? But thank you again for coming over for a half day here and presenting all the technical feedback both at this committee and TAC to the TAB group. So really, we wanted to go over a few issues. And next slide here. We've got this month and then as an information item, and then next month at the April meeting, this will be an action item before funding and programming, and what that will be is a redlined application of all the regional solicitation application materials that will go out for public comments this summer. Again, looking at an application period of this fall, as soon as kind of September, October timeframe, concluding in mid-December would be the application deadline for the 2024 regional solicitation. Again, we're looking out in program years 2028 and 2029 for that. Next slide, please. One of the questions we had at TAB was, how does the solicitation relate back to the 2040 TPP? So this is something that's in the introduction document of the solicitation. So we did talk with our TAB about that a little bit, but we can move on from that. Here's maybe the one of the big issues we want to get into today. You may remember that last funding and programming committee meeting, we talked about safety and the need or the desire, at least in the surveys and from our TAB members, to increase the amount of points for safety. We brought some recommendations to TAB, and what we heard from TAB yesterday is that they want a little bit either more. They want some more options back to them. We brought them essentially one option, and some of them liked it. Some of them said we need other options. But I think the general feedback was, do we want to increase the total points of some of the categories to 1,200 and keep others at 1,100, thereby kind of diluting the points versus kind of taking it from somewhere? That was one question we heard. Another one was, should it be more than 100 points added to safety in both the roadway categories and bike ped? So a few things we wanted to maybe just brainstorm with this group as we gear up for the future TAB meeting is in generating more options for them to consider, just at the staff level. In our debrief earlier today, we had talked about, instead of 100 points, you could do it 200 points. And it's either an addition on, as shown here, going from 1,100 to 1,200 points. Or you could go back, and we heard another approach is to kind of proportionally take that from all of the criteria and measures within the application to keep it all to 1,100 points. So you could do that as well. A little bit of caution on that is that sounds good in concept, but to implement that into this web grants and from an application category, I just think of risk assessment and all the subparts to that. So to implement that is a little tricky, not impossible, but a little tedious, I would say, on the staff perspective. So, we'd probably prefer adding points on without reducing it, but there's I think TAB, the direction we got from TAB, Chair Thompson, you can add on here too, was bring back a couple options, a little bit more maybe meat on the bones for why why the technical folks think it should be this or that, and what the impact of it would be. Did I capture that?
Yeah, that's fair. I kind of knew we weren't going to get clear direction. I mean, when I went up there to talk, I said, well, the reason we bumped up 100 points for safety was because we heard from TAB that safety was a big deal. But then half the people that spoke said, well, yeah, then it's going to dilute the other scoring measures. And it's like, yeah, that's the point, because we're putting more focus on safety. And so it was a mixed bag. Some people said, yeah, let's just do it as kind of a half measure until we have time to dive into it. But there were a couple of vocal people that, safety, we have to start addressing safety. And I said, yeah, you could throw 100 points at it, but if you really want to start addressing safety, I blatantly said 100 points. I think that's more of a gesture. If you want to structurally change, and adjust for safety, it's going to have to be a deeper dive and some major adjustments that will reduce other categories. And where are you going to take those points away from? So I didn't personally hear any clear direction other than we want a couple more options on safety. And so I mean, just what I think is, okay, yeah, we run the, okay, what does 100 points do to, if you're adding that to every category? And then maybe another option, you add 200 points. And so I think it's important, like if those are the two options, show what that would do to the past regional solicitation. Which does one project bump up 2 spots within its own category? I think there's a misconception that if we, only add 100 points to roadways and not pedestrians, well, it's not going to fund more road projects, because pedestrian, it's still going to be, the midpoint scenario or whatever they choose. It's just, are you getting the safest project within that certain category? And so God bless the staff. Taking all those comments and trying to getting something out of there for 2 options, but maybe it's a 100 point option and a 200 point option, and just doing that across roads and pedestrian. And I don't really know how to address transit, but looks like Elaine, you may want to weigh in on this.
No, I was just gonna more what you had mentioned about the diluting of points, and I think it was more as an observation of that's what it was doing versus picking specific measures that would have to be adjusted. And I think they acknowledged that that's what we have with the short amount of time we have. So I don't think it was an issue. It was just more of a pointing it out. And there was a recommendation of looking for more points too. So I think doing 100 and 200 points is a good way to go about that. And there was, the transit one did come up, but again, it's how do you do it? I mean, as we had looked through, the safety is only in the multimodal, but how you can look at what past, even some of the others past, how they receive points, would they it's you have to make caveats that this is based on what they responded to and the points they received versus would they have responded differently if there were more points in those categories. So we can prorate the points up to say, here's how some of them would have changed.
Yeah, I think both options need to show how it would have moved things around in a previous solicitation. And I think I or Steve made the point that 100 points, or maybe it was you, Elaine, it's not going to do much in terms of shifting a project that's 10 down up to the number 1 project. It's just, it's not going to do that. But that's what they want to see. And I think it's important to show, maybe the difference between 1 and 200, there is some more impact, to that.
And of course, I'm just brainstorming here. We may have to look beyond just one solicitation, because this last one, there was so much more money that so many projects were funded that it may not make a difference, where if it was the previous solicitation, maybe, of course, I just added more work. So sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I say you just pick one, well, whether it's this last one or the one before, and just kind of do a before and after for each option. But I want to open it up for kind of the group discussion. But Steve or Elaine, do you have anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay, Steve, do you want to go one by one, or do you want to? Yeah. Okay.
One by one. Yeah. Yeah, and I see Amy, who was had to sit through the TAB meeting here too. Let me just maybe verbally kind of read what you put in there.
I can read through it. Amy said some members also expressed discomfort with some application categories having 1,200 point total, while others remain at 1,100. Hard to determine why, but stated multiple times. And yeah, I did hear that, especially in the PED categories. They think for some reason, if it wasn't added there, it's gonna, put more focus on roads. But I don't think that's the case. So I think for simplicity and getting it through TAB, I know for at least roads and pedestrian, we should have 1,200. The transit, I don't know exactly what we're gonna do with that. I guess that's it.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if Jenny and TAC, being the TAC chair, connected with you on some of these items, but a lot of your comments resonate with what Minneapolis has been thinking about this. I think a lot of the comments you already brought up, I would have brought up as far as like, what's the differentiators? Because there's a lot of categories that are somewhat static. Like, how do you make it to get to what we want? Is if it's more safety, like what is the spread? And like, what would actually make it elevate to like being like, is 100 the right number? And if that can help projects move around, great. But I think maybe that's what TAB just needs to see. So I want to reiterate that from our perspective. The one thing I would say that is important for Minneapolis, I think if safety is going to be important, it should probably be reflected in all modal categories. And in the last solicitation, we were comparing like what is the outcomes of the funding scenarios, depending if you did other than midpoint. So I think if there is more safety on roadway, I wouldn't want that to potentially over influence the funding scenario on the front end. It should be influencing safety outcomes more broadly across the entire solicitation. And I just have a concern that if it's overemphasized in roadway, that may show up in like the performance metrics that roadway should be the overemphasized scenario. And I don't think the points should pre-dedicate the funding scenario on the front end. So that would be my concern is if safety is important for all categories, we should find a way to elevate that across all modal categories.
Yeah, I think from a political standpoint, yeah, while it's not going to fund more road projects if you don't add this pedestrian, I think just the optics, it's important. And that's what we heard, Nathan, from a number of the TAB members is getting to the same raised points for everything, but we didn't get it much into the transit piece. But yeah, I do agree. And I have spoken to Jenny, and she's shared a couple spreadsheets with me looking at, you know, where safety shows up in the different modal areas. And thank you for that comment.
Yeah, Chair, the one thing I'd like to make sure I say of like the talking point I had prepared is it should help differentiate within the modal categories, which ones are the most important within the modal categories, not pre-dedicate the whole funding scenario across all of them. So it should help elevate, you know, like let's say more ones that address more safety within roadway, help get those near the top, or biking or walking or what have you, and not say like, oh, because of this point, it kind of tipped the scales for all of the categories in the funding scenarios. So just want to clarify that point.
Yeah, and I explained that to TAB that that exact point. So yeah, that is noted for sure.
Chair, this is Jason from Hennepin.
Yeah, Jason.
Just as we talk through different options, I think it may be helpful to kind of illustrate those on a graphic. I think as part of the TAB materials, the scoring rubric was included, and it may be helpful to maybe illustrate those options. There you go, Steve, to show those. That way, it's kind of a visual for TAB members to see how we're, you know, advancing certain outcomes versus a lot of words on this slide that I really have to reread multiple times to understand what we're doing.
Yeah, and do we have that slide, Steve, that shows the percent for the various categories that you went over?
We do. It is attached to the agenda, I believe, for today, right, Joe? The PDF of. Well, maybe it isn't in the packet here today.
Yes, that's what I was saying, but on mute. I can unshare this for a second and put it up there if people want to see it.
Yeah, maybe if we could just put that up just to give some context to the discussion here. I think that's a pretty effective slide.
I think Cole has his hand up then too, Mr. Chair, when you're done.
Yeah, Cole.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have this is probably going to be relevant for a few of these discussions. We do have a transit planning technical working group. I just rescheduled it, but we have one on March 29th. So we're planning to have any questions that come out of here that you want a more detailed transit look at. We should direct them to look at those issues. So one of them could be, how do we address safety in the transit category, since there isn't an explicit technical category for that. or
Yeah,
criteria.
well, maybe I could just ask that now I mean, based on whatever options we kind of come up with today, if you could take that to the transit group and just, ask if they have thoughts. If we were going to get transit moved up to 1,200 points, what do you do with that? I guess that's kind of a broad question, but at least we look into it.
Can you scroll back up, Joe? And you see it with the safety, there is no measure. I mean, maybe one thing they could address is, do you add a measure? And it could be simple, please describe the safety components of your project. 100 points.
Yeah, and I don't know how transit, you look at safety, but I've heard a lot of comment about just safety to the passengers, whether it's lighting, security systems, security cameras. But that's a question for you technical experts.
Mr. Chair, this is Scott, Ramsey County.
Yeah, Scott, go for it.
So just, I think, a quick reminder for the group, and I think we all probably recall this, but I believe the origins of the safety discussion began when we were looking at our safety targets for the region. We haven't met our safety targets for 3 or 4 cycles now, and particularly for fatal and serious injury crashes. I think were the metrics that were most concerning to TAC and also to TAB, which sort of generated this whole conversation about increasing safety in the scoring process. So I guess my point with that is for transit, that's probably a different conversation, but for the roadway and bike ped categories, I don't have all the metrics memorized, but if there are particular safety or crash criteria that speak to fatal and serious injury crashes that we're scoring, I would suggest that we elevate those as we're adding points through this new methodology. Thank you.
Okay, so like crashes reduced, so focus the points on the areas that have the most benefit.
I think that's, the bottom line that from what I understand is that TAB, and I watched most of the TAB meeting yesterday, but they were talking about wanting to make a meaningful difference at the end of the day when they make these changes and not just do something that's illustrative. And so my interpretation of that, again, is like wanting to make a meaningful difference on serious injury and fatal crashes, which is where we currently have our gap between what's actually happening and our targets for the region.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think there was comment that, we want to be the most effective we can on the 2024 solicitation, given that we have time constraints and this is going to be the end all be all solution. Bring us a couple stopgap solutions. And I agree. How do we assign those points to be most effective? But I think there's that bigger discussion for the 2026 solicitation and moving forward is you're going to have to make some big structural changes to the scoring system if you're going to truly elevate safety. I know safety is built into a lot of this, but there's some other things in here that maybe could be lowered or adjusted. And that's where we don't have the time to assemble committees and go through all of that. And I believe the TAB members understood that we don't want to overcomplicate the 2024 solicitation. And how do we be most effective with the 2 options we come up with? And Scott, I think we can be pretty effective as long as we assign those points in the right spot and kind of show what the outcome impacts would be. While maybe minor for 2024, at least we're moving in the right direction, right? I saw a hand up.
Yeah, that might have been me, Maddie at Washington County.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in to follow up with Scott's comment. So to relay a message from our commissioner, we received a call after TAB yesterday, and he felt it was important we haven't even moved past the safety slide here, but For these changes to regional solicitation, he wanted to make sure that there was a clear but simple narrative of how changes will help kind of move the needle. I mean, there obviously is, to your comment just now, we know this 2024 can only do so much. But I think kind of going back to Scott's comment, a simple statement or narrative of, you know, how this whole discussion originated and how our approach is going to help us get to that point would be super helpful, or at least appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. And maybe one question for the group here. So I think one option should be do nothing. Another option could be the 100 points. The third option, and I just threw 200 out there, maybe it's 500 points, adding 500 points for safety. I mean, if you really want to try to move the needle, maybe you give them 3 very different options, because I don't know that there's going to be much difference between the 100 and 200 point scenario. But that's just an aside. Any other members have?
Hey, Chair, I was thinking something very similar as you, like, right as you were about to say that, but I think we have bonus points in the equity area or other parts, but it's very specific about severe and fatal. It can just be a qualitative response that ties back to maybe the HSIP, where it allows an applicant to say, like, you know, allow a narrative to say up to 50 bonus points and saying, like, yes, look at how much this project by doing these elements will directly reduce severe and fatal crashes. And maybe that could simplify it for staff, but also be very direct in the narrative of what everyone across all counties, all cities are experiencing with reckless driving, and what's leading to a lot of the crash increases more specifically. And that's just, you know, a thought that I popped into my head, and that, you know, not being in the weeds like staff, but maybe that's a very direct way to get to the specific thing everyone's raising.
All right, thank you, Nathan.
Say, Mr. Chair, just one quick more question. This is Cole from Met Council.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's important as we talk about this to remind them that we are doing a regional safety study action plan, and that, you know, I think we just have to be cautious about saying, you know, even making all the points safety is not necessarily going to have the type of change I think they're thinking it will. You know, we've been investing in projects that I think everyone would say are safe for the last couple of decades. It's not like that's going to change overnight. So no matter how many points we give it, it's sort of a culture shift that we would need to make in order to have the kind of impact I think they want. So I just wanted to highlight that let's not overpromise that if you just put a bunch of points into safety, it's going to solve this problem.
Yeah, no, great point. You know, you're anything that we do through the solicitation, I mean, you have driver behavior, alcohol use, speeding. I mean, there's a lot of things outside of the control of, you know, designing and implementing a project. But yeah, great point on that. And maybe something that staff can reiterate to TAB as this discussion moves forward is there's many other factors that go along with safety than just what we're looking at here.
I think that maybe pose a question, as you know, many of our members are potential applicants. Would having 200 extra points on a safety category change the projects you may be submitting? I mean, before you looking at what was submitted, you probably do some preliminary calculations where you think you may score on many of the items, not all of them, but will this change which projects are submitted?
Yeah, anybody want to weigh in or put some feedback in the chat?
Because where you may have scored lower on some of the current measures, now that safety's another 200 points, that may change.
Yeah, I just want to repeat some context from probably a few meetings ago that part of the reasoning for looking at more points was the finding that some of our top scoring safety or projects in the safety category or criteria were not being funded. So it's an attempt to move the importance of that up. I guess that's just where I was thinking this came from, and to kind of address that. So I mean, I'm not sure that it may change. I guess I can't say for sure which projects, but I know probably a couple of solicitations back, we were concerned where one of our top safety project, multiple fatalities, the high safety score was really wiped out by the outlier process. So there's a couple ways that safety maybe doesn't get recognized fully within just how the scoring plays out. But I just want to kind of get back to the recognition of kind of looking at the projects that received the really high safety scores, but then didn't get funded, even though we had, a lot of projects funded this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony. Steve.
Yeah, well, maybe try and sum up this slide, and then so we can get to the rest of them here from what I've heard here today. So number one, revamp the slide. It's too confusing. I agree with that. Especially as it goes to the tab level, they were confused a little bit too. Number two, get some clarification on transit. As this goes to the transit work group at the end of this month, we'll bring that back to TAC in April as part of that info item. Number three, look back at past solicitations to see what the impact of either adding 100 or adding 200 points would be, and then we'll have that ready by TAC. In fact, we've already done 100 points internally. Didn't have much to your point. It didn't make a great deal of difference. Flipped a few projects here and there, the ranking, but didn't change the world.
Yeah,
100 points.
Before you move on, I mean,
yeah,
instead of 200, I mean, should we look at 300 or give the tab a little bit of a little bit of a gap there, so they have some really different options? The do nothing 100 and 300 is kind of the stopgap, because I like you said, if 100 is not going to do much compared to the existing scenario, I don't know that 200 is going to do a whole lot.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good point. Maybe we'll take a look at it from a data perspective and see where some of those tipping points are. And as we bring this to TAC, we will bring that on. Focusing on the fatal and serious injury crashes, I'd have to give a little more thought to a few of those comments that we heard today on how to best incorporate that.
And one thing about with the scoring adjustments we're doing it's prorating it up based on the points they received, where the scoring may have been spread out more when there was more points too.
Okay.
That's an issue that can't be resolved this way, but there would have probably been a better distribution of scoring points with a larger point range.
Yeah.
So those are my takeaways, and want to just make sure you're comfortable with kind of where we're going on that, Mr. Chair. And
yeah, no, I think that's good. I think, doing the do nothing, the 100 point, and then I don't know what that next level is, but maybe you guys can do, if it's not too hard, some sensitivity analysis where, hey, if you do this many points, this is where you're really going to start seeing projects shift. But what I got out of TAB is they want to see what those movements would be based on the points for them to help make a decision. And maybe they decide not to do anything, but at least we gave them some options that could have some different effects.
Okay, thank you. Next slide then, please. This, I think we pushed out to the 2026 cycle, so I don't think we need to spend any more time on that today. Tied scores. Did talk about this at the tab level. One idea that came from a tab member I thought was pretty good, and the rest of the staff did too, here was you could break a tie based, we're talking about safety, obviously, was the focus yesterday. So you could break a tie based on the highest, what score you got on the safety measure, and we'd have to detail exactly what measure we're talking about in the application categories. But That was, we thought, a pretty good idea to put it actually explicitly right in the application. And that's what we heard from Tab is like, if you want some guidance, this should be written down in the application before we see the list come forth. So I guess that's a second good idea if we want to do something, we should write it before the application's out. Number two, the idea was you can break a tie based on the highest safety score was the idea that was presented by one member. So want to see what people thought about that.
Got thoughts from anybody on the committee?
I think that's a good idea. How about a coin toss?
Hey.
Well, one Tab member said, well, if it's a tie, just tell the scorers to go back and rescore it so it's not a tie. I'm like, I wouldn't want to be the project that gets put in the back because then I'm appealing up to the full Met Council. So.
I mean, I kind of joke about a coin toss, but I think we should recognize that our scores are just not all that terribly precise. So when we have a tie, it's not that you can't really say that they're exactly the same kind of project or the same project.
Okay, so we got a coin flip from Carl for the Bloomington projects, and then we'll do safety for all the other ones.
I go for that.
Any other thoughts from members?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Scott again. Your comment about safety actually was sort of in jest, but I agree with it. If we're really focusing on safety, it would seem logical that we look at the safety points to break a tie.
Yeah, and I think it gets right back to Tab's safety focus here. And this is a small win, is just make it clear if there is a tie, which is very rare. So I don't think we need to spend too much time on this, but yeah, it's just clearly outlined in the application that it's this safety score in this part of the solicitation. So and that makes sense. I think we can move on unless we have any more comment here. I'll just open it one final time for comment on this slide.
Chair, this is Jason.
No sub ties in the safety category. Met Council staff cannot allow ties in any safety category.
Yeah.
We'll just say cities of the first class have to take a back seat if there's a tie on safety.
I revert to the coin toss rule then.
I will just leave it to the scorer, not to make sure there's any safety ties.
Yeah. Jason, I saw you came in here real quick.
Yeah, comments on the breaking ties, not the cities of the first class rule. But we have such technical experts on the scoring committees, and then we have a scoring committee chair. That kind of feels like the right place for identifying which project is maybe slightly better than the other one. I agree with all the comments about using safety as a mechanism, but as far as when that decision takes place, it feels like the scoring committee, final meeting is the appropriate place.
Thank you for that comment. All right, Steve, you want to move on?
Sure. Two more I want to touch on here today. Yeah, so that would be number 5. Next slide. So we discussed this one quite a bit. This is the bus rapid transit rule. So again, the last sentence in the italicized text is what's in the application. So no more than 32 million total will come from arterial bus rapid transit, 25 million plus $7 million of other BRT coming from the competitive categories. So to tell you the truth, Tab was confused with this one because the people who went through this process back in 2016 and the 8 or 10 meetings we had on this and other topics understood it, but anyone that was new really didn't. And so I don't think we got great feedback on this. We got people kind of on both sides of it. Part of this ties into the next maximum dollar award amount too, but Nicole, you want to jump in a little bit on this one? This is maybe a little bit more your bailiwick than mine here, but
I can, first I want to I feel like the timeline is maybe a little bit confused from folks. I believe we set up this BRT rule in 2019 for first implementation in the 2020 cycle. And some of the TAB members were indicating 2016. And I was like, I don't think we've had this in place for 6 years. But yeah, the brief history was that we had 54 million available for transit when we had 180 million under the previous regional solicitation. So the 32 million was based on that midpoint, and it was based on providing only a certain amount for BRT so that other projects would be able to compete for the rest of the fund, so that all BRT wasn't eating up all the money. Because we have more money overall, and thus more money for transit under a midpoint, and we heard TAB when they were evaluating projects and creating scenarios last year that they thought that the BRT rule should be revisited because it did force them to go very far down the transit list. And so we came up with an option that said, maybe we should base it on the number of projects that are not BRT and set a minimum there so that we're at least funding a certain number of projects. I think the discussion at TAB yesterday indicated that we don't necessarily like that approach. We like limiting BRT more than we like assuring non-BRT projects. So I think what we should really do with this one is maybe just approach it with a new number than the 32 million as an option for TAB, or maybe multiple options, kind of keeping to the spirit of we want to make sure that BRT doesn't eat up all the money, but we have more money available. We've gotten a lot of requests for BRT projects over the years. And so I don't think we want to tie TAB's hands and have to go really far down a transit list in case we do get BRT projects. It doesn't force us to do anything. It just says if we get too many BRT projects, we won't fund all of them as long as we set the right number. So I don't know. Again, this is one we can have the transit group discuss, but I think the simplest change is to maybe just increase 32 million by just maybe 7 million to add another potential fully funded project and still leave plenty of money for other transit projects in this category. That's my take on what TAB was looking for, not so much of a new rule like this was approaching, but just reassess the value that we have set here.
Okay, so that 32 million back in 2019, right? It was based kind of on the midpoint, and it was a 25 million maximum to BRT, and then the rest to other projects. And what you're saying is just move that up to $40,000, which would better reflect the midpoint in the 2024 solicitation for the category. Is that
we'd probably increase it even more if we wanted to do that. So I think we'll just look at some numbers, relative to how much more money we have now, and I think we'll just put out maybe 2 or 3 options for TAB. One of which will be, let's keep it the same, because I think there wasn't strong consensus that we necessarily need to change this. So probably just, like you said, a 32, maybe a 39 and another number, and we'll come up with some justification as to why we picked those 3 numbers.
Okay, yeah, and I know through this committee and TAC, I think there was some confusion as well, and what I heard was we spent so much time putting this together. If we're going to change it again, I think we may need to go through another process, but maybe if you put some options out there for TAB to look at, because I still don't fully understand this item, but I'm sure if they had options and the people that were on that original committee could make sense of what would be the fairest moving forward.
Yeah, Michael, I can just say one thing. What ended up happening last cycle was we had this rule in place, and we got 2 projects that applied for funding that were on a BRT line, and we had to skip one of them because the first project that was on a BRT line used the additional 7 million on top of the 25 million. So we had reached the $32 million maximum, so we had to skip a project and actually fund the last project in one of the transit categories as a result of skipping that project because of this rule. And that's why it had so much discussion at TAB, is because they really felt like, I wouldn't say that they disagreed with the rule, but they said that rule really tied our hands.
Okay.
And I want to add on there, it wasn't just skipping it. Money was transferred out of the transit category because the rule said you couldn't fund that project. That some funding was moved over. I think it went to the trails category.
Okay, and Cole, I think if you do put options together, that just like for the safety category, showing what the potential impacts would have been from the past solicitation on how you could have not skipped that project that we're talking about, and it would have better funded priorities. I think that would be important to show with those options.
Yep, and we can probably go back a few cycles too. So we'll do that.
Okay.
Chair, I have a follow-up for Cole and maybe Steve, but since the formula funding has increased, it seems like just leaving it stagnant doesn't reflect the current funding realities. And if we just said, hey, funding goes up 20%, logically at a minimum, this should go up 20% to reflect that.
Yeah, Nathan, I think that's probably one of the options we'll do is something similar to that kind of proportional increase, but we don't want to put only one option out there. So I think that's good feedback though. That can certainly be one of the options.
Yep, I agree. Good point.
Yeah, good conversation there. Should we move on to the last item here as we run down the meeting time? Number 9.
Yeah. Please proceed, Steve. Yes.
Yeah, so this is the last topic, and TAC Chair Jenny Hager wanted this group to kind of dig in a little bit to the details. So particularly on the maximum funding award, you know, we've had the maximums on many of these categories since 2014. A few of them we've adjusted in the intervening cycles. But, you know, given the construction inflation we've all been experiencing the last few years, and, you know, if you go all the way back to 2014, you know, start adding those up, and $7 million doesn't buy you as much as it used to in the solicitation. So this has led to lean more on our local partners to kind of fill that void of the funding gap. So she has asked us to take a look at these maximum awards, and oh yeah, Elaine's saying that the pedestrian maximum now is $2 million. We shifted that up last time from 1 million to 2 million. But to see if there's an appetite to increase some of the awards, and again, the policy question, and this was illuminated at TAB yesterday, is, you know, you increase the award amount and then you get fewer projects. We funded, so there's kind of a give and take there, certainly, but what do people think about the maximum federal award? Either on a wholesale basis, kind of looking at that, or maybe there's specific categories that people say, yeah, everyone's applying for more than 7 million and the maximum 7 million here. Everybody's applying for 12, 13, 14 million, or in some cases, maybe it's fine where it is. So, Mr. Chair?
Do you have a sense how many in various categories are exactly that, asking for the maximum, and we know that they're only paying for half of it? And kind of conversely, do we have any that are down at the minimums?
Yeah, not too many. Safe routes to school every once in a while, but, you know, if I were to kind of go through this list just based on memory, traffic management technologies, it's pretty good at 3.5 million. All the submittals.
Yeah, I was going to say, last round, I think we reduced the traffic management technologies because they weren't coming in very high.
Yep, so that one seemed to be in a good place. Same thing with spot mobility and safety. We don't seem to be encroaching on that. Strategic capacity, certainly, but we did increase that 2 cycles ago from 7 to 10 million. But people are almost every application's asking for much more than 10, or would ask for more. Reconstruction is one. In the last few years, we've heard several complaints that 7 million, especially for some of these reconstruction projects, they're getting really expensive, the urban reconstruction projects in particular. Bridge would kind of round out the roadways, and we do get some, you know, we get a sprinkling of 7+ million and then a bunch of like 5 million and less projects. Arterial bus rapid transit, when we started that program, Cole says, I guess 2019 is when we kind of instituted that. in 2020 was the F line, 2022 cycle was G line. Those lines, we started about 75 million. Yesterday, Deb Barber at Transportation Committee Chair said at TAB that the next line, FGH line, is over 100 million. So, 25 million out of 105 million is what she said it was the price tag on that one. The other transit expansion modernizations, we get some that are asking for more than 7 million, others that aren't. So that's kind of an open question. The trails, we had a lot of discussion about the 5.5, trying to lower it a couple times down to 3.5. Didn't work at the TAB level. But people are asking for more than 5.5 in some cases. And same thing with PED and safe routes to school. A lot of times we're pretty close to maxing those out in several cases. So maybe be quiet at this point and let others kind of chime in.
Yeah, Stephen, what I heard from maybe a couple of the TAB members is maybe whenever we looked at this last, one scenario could be just running the inflationary factor just to see where this would get us. I don't know if it's $1 million more, but yeah, I guess I'd open it up to the group for comments or questions on this.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Angie.
Yes, I want, I guess to clarify, the pedestrian facilities was at $2 million for the maximum last time. So just want to confirm that, I guess we're not proposing to go back down to 1 million, or
Yeah.
maybe we are, and I missed
No,
that.
I think that's a typo. You're correct.
Okay, great. So it was stay the same. Thank you.
Say, Mr. Chair, this is Cole. I have to leave for another meeting. I just wanted to note, I know that in some categories, I know transit better than most, but some of the projects are scoped to fit with the max and not, go much above that. So I think just sometimes be cautionary about whether you're looking at numbers and saying, well, transit rarely reaches the max because sometimes they scope the project, to maximize the federal dollars versus the local dollars. So if we raised it, you might still get projects that want more money. And I think that might be true in some other categories too.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, linear projects. Yeah. Point noted. And from my recollection, the strategic capacity, the reason we raised that is just because the go from a signalized intersection to grade separation, there was just such a large cost to that. And that was kind of the main reasoning for that. But yeah, I agree. I mean, the road reconstruction modernization, a lot of applicants look to their project limits and cut out, kind of the most critical portion to kind of take advantage of that 80-20 split. So yeah, I don't know if there'll be any right answer here, but I know TAB did want to get some thoughts or options on this.
Here, I'll just reiterate, I think what you or staff said is inflation is probably felt on every single one of these projects, especially as sponsors here delivering all these projects, whether it's the steel for signals or ADA ramps, labor, it's all pretty painful. So I think that's probably resonates with every one of these. I think the one about modernization reconstructions fell too, like 7 million, I think gets us maybe a little over a half mile of an urban reconstruct right now. Like that's when we think about scoping our like projects in Minneapolis, like that's kind of our baseline of like what that amount would get us right now. Bridges, I think everyone's feeling that as well. So like I think I don't have a recommendation, but I think there'll be some strong conversation of like, do those still make sense looking out into 28 and 29, given where inflationary pressures are at right now. The last thing I'll say is, given the focus on safety and like thinking about actually putting together a bid package for safe routes at 1 million, those are very tough right now to get competitive bids. And I think thinking about safety and what that threshold is, since you have to bid those, 1 million or less is really tough. And I think, thinking about moving that up in parity with pedestrian to 2 million is something worth pursuing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Carl again. I'd make a comment that the obvious downside of increasing the maximum is we fund fewer projects. So we should at least be cognizant. I mean, are we happy with the number of projects we're awarding? And obviously the fewer projects we award, the more difficulty we're going to have with our conversation about geographic equity.
Yeah, great comment, and that did come up in the discussion. And what I would say is, people who are just under the funding line always want more projects funded. So, yeah, certainly that's a great point, because cities or counties, agencies find a way to get creative and leverage, other outside funding at times. But good point, Carl.
Well, and kind of another thought I always have is, I mean, if we give projects more money, are those projects that would not happen otherwise? I suspect many of them would gladly take partial funding and still provide the remainder of the funding on their own. So, I mean, one argument could be that if you're trying to leverage as much money as possible, you keep the maximums, you don't keep raising the maximums.
Yeah, I think that through our regional solicitation process, I mean, we try to fund many projects, and that's how it's always been. Other MPOs maybe focus on fewer high dollar projects. So I think it is kind of a policy question on what do you want to do, more projects, or do you want to do fewer projects but focus on large scale projects? And I Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the outer county members said, the smaller amounts allow more money to be spread around, and you're not just focusing on those large projects. Maybe, I don't know if it was said the inner metro area, but so there were a few different points on this.
Mr. Chair, this is Scott again. I agree with what Carl is saying. I guess this is sort of a double-edged sword. I'm not sure where I'm landing on this, but just one thing that's popping out at me here as I'm looking at all of this and our discussion about safety. We say that all the projects have some element of safety, which is true, but the one category that actually has safety in its name, we have one of the lowest maximum federal award dollar amounts that is available. So I guess just pointing that out, and back to Cole's comment about, that the proposers sometimes scope their projects based upon what the maximum federal award is. So just because projects are coming in below the federal award doesn't necessarily mean that that's the sweet spot. That just means that's how people are scoping their projects.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. So I've heard a few people comment about, safe routes to school and looking at perhaps bumping that up. Other comments, feedback?
I guess I was talking about the spot mobility and safety category.
The $3.5 million.
Yeah.
Yep. So we've had there, and then safe routes to school. I think Nathan had commented on. Good feedback. Thank you.
And I'm just looking at the numbers here. I'm making these for the spot mobility and safety. The largest request was 3.2 million. So none of them even met the 3.5.
Yeah, and again, my point there, Elaine, was that back to what Cole was saying, that I think sometimes proposers scope their projects based upon what the award is. So I guess I'd be curious to know if you could do a survey or something, if the award would be higher, potential award would be higher for mobility and safety. Would people have projects, larger projects that they would consider submitting?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Andrew.
I can add as a applicant in that category, and part of this discussion is kind of the trade-offs between higher awards. So the Carver County project, it was that was funded 5th out of 10, and 6 were funded. So more on that funding bubble. That project, is for one roundabout. There's interest to still see if we can fund a series of 3 roundabouts as part of that project, just in partnership with the city for like a larger safety improvement. We're for sure moving forward with the 1 roundabout that's funded, but that's an example where if the funding maximum was higher, that's something we would have been interested in. However, being closer to the middle of the pack in that category, the alternative is we may not have received funding for the 1 roundabout. So just some context for the discussion. I think it's a good discussion. Make a larger in safety improvement, but also may not have received funding for the 1 intersection either. So thanks.
Raising that will maybe allow more projects to be submitted, but I would anticipate the same projects in the lower ranges would still be coming in. It may not affect beyond 1 or 2. I would think that the bigger.
Chair, this is Jason from Hennepin.
Yeah.
Chair, if I recall, the 2022 solicitation, we had an unprecedented amount of awards because of how MnDOT rebalanced the local agencies, where the timing of the funding just all landed for 2022. So I don't think we'll have that same luxury for the next solicitation. So this may end up kind of being a double-edged sword if we increase some category maximums as well as have less funding to distribute. We may see many fewer projects than last solicitation, and just want people to be aware of that potential outcome, but then also just trying to think through the purpose of maybe raising some award maximums. Have we gotten much feedback from applicants who return their funds? Like, do they indicate why they're returning funds, whether it's because they don't have the local match or do they run into project development issues? That might be a helpful data point to inform a decision.
They usually let us know, and I'm going to defer to Colleen, the specifics.
Yeah, I think most of them are due to environmental impacts or railroad, or they just can't get there right away on time. It doesn't really seem to be about money, but we are seeing more program year extensions because of the money and the gaps, because they want to apply for more legislative funds in the next round or whatever. So I think it's kind of a little bit of both.
Do you know which projects are kind of pushing that off for a year to see if they can get more funding through the legislature or other sources, or not?
Well, yeah, there was the St. Paul Kellogg bridges. They did that extension.
Okay.
Because of the costs went up with inflation so much. They were all on target funding wise, and then the big jump went with inflation, and they just didn't have the funds to move forward in last fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Elaine, you had a comment?
Yeah, it's rare for the funding amounts. I mean, I think it's the Kellogg Bridge. They withdrew previously and had to reapply because they didn't get the money from the legislature. Then when they got it, then the cost changed. But typically, that hasn't been an issue. And we also do, as part of our application process, the applicants are supposed to have the money or say they're having the money, their match, when they submit.
Yeah, I remember that whole process. So yeah, that was kind of unique there. So luckily, I think this is our last item for discussion today, but I don't know, staff, have you gotten enough feedback on that item?
Yeah, we've got some feedback. I'm not sure, I wrote down some of the same ones you called out there, Mr. Chair. But I think we're going to have to continue this at the TAC level here, and some good points too about the balancing here. We're going to go from probably $350 million being available to more like $250. So we had a big kind of one-time surplus here, and while the next solicitation is going to be more than last, it's going to be around the 250 range. You're not going to see 94 projects again. I mean, that's just the way it's going to go either way. This huge influx of 94 projects getting selected is not going to happen next cycle.
Well, we could always cut the Max Fed award in half
Yes. There's your 94 projects.
I think Clean will retire.
Yeah, I know. Poor Colleen. Yeah, I'm sure Colleen's like, can you just put all the money into one big project and call it a day?
Yeah, after this year, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you got some feedback here. We can discuss this in more detail at TAC, and then kind of update TAC on what we heard from TAB, which kind of focused more on the inflationary piece than specific categories. But we'll continue that discussion.
Yep. So yeah, thanks everyone for their feedback, and again, next month we'll be back with a red line version here, but seems like we have a few issues to kind of work through between now and then, and we'll get there. But making good progress, I think, overall.
Okay, great. So, and this will be coming to TAC kind of with our feedback, and do you think we'll have options on some of these items by the time we get to TAC, or what do you think the timing would be for options for the safety and maybe the minimum and maximums, for example, and transit safety? Next TAC meeting doable?
Yes. Yep. I think, yep, staff's we're gonna have to get together and turn this around. So we've got some good options to talk about at TAC.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, on that note, we are at about 3:15. So I guess I would just ask, do we have any final comments or questions on this item before we move to other business? Okay, seeing none. Other business, we have none. So we are officially adjourned here at 3:15. Thank you, everybody, for your time and thoughtful input.